Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. And today we are looking at quite possibly the greatest conspiracy in the history of mankind. And we are tackling it in typical MINDSHOCK fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront, attempting not to fall for any silly logical fallacies like all the other podcasts and mainstream media coverage out there on every single subject. But we don't do that here. Objectivity is the goal. Neutrality is the goal. Science is skepticism, not blind faith acceptance of everything out there, particularly from the mainstream, the powers that be, the establishments out there. Because just a quick look at history, how often have they been correct about anything? The majority of people have been wrong about the majority of things, the majority of the time. Nothing new. But the coincidence theorists refuse to accept this for some reason. As always, if you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you're still not getting notifications, like and comment on more videos. Or just go to youtube.com/MINDSHOCK. You could also check us out, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind. Leave them in the comment section. Alright, is the echo better now? Is the echo better? Is there still an echo? Yeah, it was sounding kind of weird before. Sounds okay now. Some kind of volume issue. Okay. So, we got a lot to go over. So, I've been looking at Antarctica for a pretty long time. So, everything from the etymology of the word ant, as in giant, giants, Antarctica, the land of giants. We're not going down that rabbit hole for the purpose of this podcast. We are going to be going down many other rabbit holes, however. So, first of all, we have the issue of the history of maps themselves. Because why is Antarctica showing up on maps as either Atlantis itself or as this green continent, as in the Piri Reis map? What's going on? So it's southern unknown land. 1513, we're not going to be verifying dates here, but just the map's old. The map was not made in modern times, however old it was. Why is it green in the Piri Reis map and other maps? Now, all of a sudden, it's covered by ice. And even still, a lot of that is disputed. So, also, the shape is quite similar to Atlantis as depicted by Patroclus Campanicus in 1891. And what can be deduced from that? I mean, again, going back to the etymology of ant, giant, like it's some big joke, because ants are so small and giants are so big. I mean, that's a weird one. That's definitely a weird one. So let's get even weirder. Let's go further into Mindshock land. So pyramids are found all over the world, of course. A lot of people don't talk about the pyramids in Antarctica, though. Not just the pyramids, but there are some very interesting nomenclatures in Antarctica, such as the Rockefeller Plateau. That's kind of weird. Why is it called the Rockefeller Plateau? We got Rothschild Island, Delta Island, Omicron Island, Deception Island. I mean, this is very, very strange nomenclature. Very, very strange. You got Roosevelt on there. I mean, you got all these strange names here. Welcome, everyone in the chat. We got some of the usual suspects here: Heracles, Justin Johnson, Riz in the house. So, yeah, this is kind of weird because you have the Rockefeller Plateau, Rothschild Island, you got pyramids, or, I mean, because look at some of these mountains. I mean, for the wind to hit absolutely perfectly for hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of years, in order to make perfectly symmetrical pyramid faces, that's kind of weird. That's a big ask. I mean, the coincidence theorists are all over that. They'll eat that up. But for people with functioning brains, I mean, for the wind to hit each side of the pyramid, or if it was natural, equally, I mean, that's a big ask. The rain, the wind, just absolutely equal on all sides for hundreds or hundreds of thousands of years. That's a big ask. It's a big one. And things are about to get even stranger. So let's take a look here at Area 122, some kind of secret laboratory that's right next to what appears to be a pyramid. In most of the photos, though, they conveniently avoid getting the pyramid in the shot. It's actually very difficult to find photos where the pyramid is in the shot. So, what are they doing at Area 122? So, Wikipedia has a very short article here: the Arrival Heights Laboratory. So, it is supposedly a research station in the Antarctic specially protected area of Arrival Heights in Antarctica. So, an ASPA, an Antarctic Specially Protected Area, is an area on the continent of Antarctica or on nearby islands which is protected by scientists and several different international bodies. The protected areas were established in 1961 under the Antarctic Treaty System, which governs all land and waters south of the 60th latitude. Does anybody find it weird that it's not the 66th? It's only the 60th, but anyway, and protects against human development, or at least that's the reason given on paper. A permit is required for entry into any ASPA site. The ASPA sites are protected by the governments of Australia, New Zealand, US, UK, Chile, France, Argentina, Poland, Russia, Norway, Japan, India, Italy, and the Republic of Korea. Even Korea is down in Antarctica protecting these sites. There are currently 72 sites. Again, anybody find this kind of strange that all these random countries, and apparently nobody's violating, although I guess if they were violating the treaties, we might not know, but it's kind of weird. Justin states, why isn't Antarctica on the Gleason map, the World Health Organization's logo, the Maritime Organization, the Aviation Organization, and UN logo all serve to protect the Arctic Treaty? Heracles is scared. Riz states, fight wars over land, but not this land. His son, UV Liberty, we are going to build here to make sure nothing is built here. Heracles states they are definitely building underground. Well, with all of the underground tunnels, I mean, we're talking millions upon millions of miles all over the world on every single continent. Why wouldn't there be underground tunnels, ancient tunnels under Antarctica as well, if they exist on every other continent, in almost every country? That's kind of weird. I might do a re-air of my Hollow Earth series so everybody can follow along and comment. Maybe even later tonight. We'll see. I go over a lot of that on that series. So let's read some more about Area 122. So this is around 2 kilometers from McMurdo Station. Not McMurder, but McMurdo. McMurdo is an American Antarctic research station on the southern tip of Ross Island, which is in the New Zealand claimed Ross Dependency on the shore of McMurdo Sound in Antarctica. It is operated by the U.S. through the United States Antarctic Program, a branch of the National Science Foundation. And JR has spoken about the National Science Foundation and their links to the CIA and various top secret operations. So does it surprise anybody that they run all of this? Kind of weird. The station is the largest community in Antarctica, capable of supporting up to 1,500 residents, and serves as one of 3 year-round U.S. Antarctic science facilities. All personnel and cargo going to or coming from Amundsen Scott South Pole Station first pass through McMurdo. McMurdo Station, nicknamed Mactown by its residents, continues to operate as the hub for American activities on the Antarctic continent. By road, McMurdo is 1.9 miles from New Zealand's smaller Scott base. I mean, the history here is actually quite fascinating. The station takes its name from its geographic location on McMurdo Sound, named after Lieutenant Archibald McMurdo of the British ship HMS Terror. I mean, we got a lot of weird names here. Deception Island, Terror, like these ships called Terror. Well, what is going on here in Antarctica? The U.S. officially opened its first station at McMurdo February 16th, 1956, as part of Operation Deep Freeze. In 1962, Arcus rockets were launched from McMurdo, 28 of them between 62 and 63. So supposedly, the Antarctic Treaty is all about conservation efforts, but they're literally launching rockets? I mean, isn't that military activity? Arcus rockets originally all-purpose rocket for collecting atmospheric soundings. It's a sounding rocket. Office of Naval Research and the Air Force Research Center developed these contracts for these rockets. So supposedly they just collect atmospheric soundings, but they're contracted by the Office of Naval Research and the Air Force. I mean, the Air Force is a branch of the military. I mean, it's just really weird. Everything about Antarctica is really weird, and nothing really adds up here. I mean, nothing really adds up. Use Your Illusions commented, sorry, a bit behind. I'm at 72 sites. Anyone else think of King Solomon's 72 demons? Hmm. I mean, again, this is all kind of weird because even though this is supposed to be a non military activity here, they're still launching rockets developed by military. Supposedly research rockets, but I mean, it's all just weird. It's really weird. But yeah, 72 is a curious number. Definitely pops up in the occult quite often. Let me read about the. I'll read about Area 112 on newshub.co.nz. Antarctica's Area 51. Venturing inside the lab, you need government clearance to see, by Brianna Barraclough, March 21st, 2018. Conspiracies thrive in Antarctica. It's locked down tight, they say, patrolled by the military, and only those with official security clearance can enter the most secretive areas. The Arrival Heights Laboratory is inside one of those secure areas. Only those with government authorized permits can enter, and apparently me. Rattling up the icy road to the laboratory, the first thing you notice is a strange looking building in the distance, strongly resembling a giant disco ball. You know what else is interesting? If the Earth isn't a sphere, and this is all some kind of inside joke, would they put these spherical bases in Antarctica to just poke fun at the whole thing? Because if the Earth's not a sphere, Antarctica is a ring encircling some kind of flat-ish type plane, would they put some kind of spherical laboratory just to kind of as a wink wink? That's kind of funny. We can't show you what's in there, joked one of the personnel I traveled with, pointing at the mysterious orb. I shouldn't have been surprised. She works for the government. Crunching over the rocks and snow, I was very aware of what this visit signified. I was taking a glimpse behind the curtains. Nothing was a secret from a journalist with a mission. The lab is in the Antarctic Specially Protected Area, Area 122 to be precise. You know what's kind of weird though? Supposedly there's 72 of them, but this one's called 122. So what's with their naming mechanisms, or are they just way more and they don't admit a lot of them? And after seeing that disco ball, I half expected to find aliens hidden below the ice. Arrival Heights is blocked off by a series of ropes. Security is low tech in the most isolated place in the world. A big red stop sign, like you'd see on a normal road, warns anyone without a permit to stay away. The lab itself is inside a simple container building, a splash of green against otherwise monochromatic continent. Off in the distance, the orb sits and watches. Inside the container, it's dim and staticky. Our heavy jackets come off and we're made to sign a book recording our visit. This is it. I'm already further in than most people get to go. And now it's time to head even deeper into this secretive place. Behind one heavy door is research that's been ongoing for decades, we're told. Stepping inside the room is like stepping back in time. Area 122 has been home to Kiwi scientists since 1959, and the tech certainly reflects the Antarctic mindset: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. These clunky computers are older than I am, but they work. The interfaces are as basic as they come, and instead of a USB port, each computer is equipped with a floppy disk drive. It's not worth the cost of sending down a new computer and taking away the old for disposal, so long as it still works. Skylights are scattered throughout the roof, providing a direct access point to the world above. A long, boxy piece of equipment known as the Dobson spectrometer sits in the corner with a large periscope poking out of it and up through the roof. Its role is to examine the ozone layer to study the now shrinking hole above the continent. Wait, whatever happened to the hole in the ozone layer? It's magically shrinking now? Other equipment studies the upper atmospheres and the auroras, the polar lights. The equipment down here is so sensitive. Visitors are warned about breathing too hard around it, lest you impact research that's been going on for decades. If you're visiting during the endless night of winter, you have to turn off your headlights while driving up the hill so the light doesn't disturb the data readings. Arrival Heights is a designated quiet zone in an effort to prevent anything, including electromagnetic noise, such as signals coming from your radio, from influencing the raw data. Finally, an excuse to wear a tinfoil hat. It's incredible that all of this fragile equipment is housed inside essentially a giant box. Like many Antarctic buildings, the lab is really just a large green container that's been dumped on the ice. But while the lab itself looks simple from the outside, it's what can be seen across the way that's truly impressive. The orb is massive and almost glitters in the early afternoon sunlight. Stood atop a barren mountain, the orb is what keeps Scott Base connected to the outside world. It houses satellites connecting those living in another set of green containers just over the hill to the rest of the world. The orb, mysterious and powerful, really highlights why humans come to this inhospitable place to begin with. Like Scott's hut, it's a true marker of human endurance, although presented in a totally different way. Research is brought in and sent back. Workers can stay connected with their families. As a news company, we were able to send back live coverage from the ice. After some maneuvering to protect the camera, I managed to climb onto the roof of the lab and gaze across the bay. Despite it being early in the summer season, you could still see the frozen sea starting to thin and crack. In just a few months, it will have completely broken up, with wide oceans stretching as far as the eye can see. But turning to face the other direction, there's a surprising sight. Next to a pyramid-shaped mountain sits another mysterious orb. It's smaller and paler, closer to America's McMurdo station than the one at Arrival Heights. As we drive away, I can't help but wonder what's within. So this journalist, Brianna Barraclough, supposedly wrote this up 2018 about her visit, but she wasn't really allowed to see much, even by her own words. It is curious that she mentioned the pyramid shaped mountain, because there's not really a lot of info available on that. Sun UV Liberty posted Giants Bro Giants. Nephilim, Rephaim, our governments have made dark pacts with principalities and powers or princes. You know what's weird though? They've been pushing this inhospitable narrative. What if most of Antarctica is just similar to maybe Canada? I mean, really, really cold in certain areas, but not necessarily inhospitable. They just don't want people going there. They don't want people to even want to go there. I mean, would that explain them just constantly pushing it? Because was it the Vikings that named Iceland Iceland and Greenland Greenland? Because they didn't want anybody going to Iceland, and they wanted to distract everybody to go to Greenland, which is mostly ice and inhospitable. Is that the same propaganda they're using hundreds or thousands of years later for Antarctica, trying to get people to not even want to wonder or go there? So let's go to a more conspiratorial site. Let's go to infinityexplorers.com. Area Fit 122. This secret laboratory in Antarctica hides something very strange by Ansh Shrivastava, October 14th, 2018. Numerous conspiracy theories exist around this mysterious secret laboratory. Area 122 is located on Ross Island in the frozen and enigmatic Antarctic, and it is not accessible to everyone. The area belongs to the ASPA, which means Antarctic Specially Protected Area. In total, there are 170. So, according to this, they're stating 170 ASPA plants distributed throughout the Antarctic, most of which are used for scientific research. Some conspiracy theories say that this area is used to search for extraterrestrial phenomenons, but cannot be confirmed for the time being. Officially, the secret facility serves the scientists who work there to explore the aurora borealis and the ozone layer. The installation has a dome that resembles a radar system, but the interior is harmless and nothing mysterious. Well, how would they know? The researchers keep in touch with their families, employers, friends, and relatives via satellite. Only the strict military surveillance of the costly research facility, which lies deep in the South Pole Mountains, remains mysterious. Area 122 is under military control 24 hours a day and has been hermetically sealed. Potential intruders without security clearance would not have an opportunity to enter the base. The soldiers on guard would arrest the person immediately and most likely interrogate her. I guess her or him, I don't know. Area 122 is operated by the Antarctic Program of the U.S. and Antarctica of New Zealand. The research team has to work with old computers that are not equipped with a USB port but with a floppy disk. The skylights are distributed over the roof and offer direct access to the world outside the secret laboratory. In the corner, there is a Dobson spectrometer with a large periscope protruding from it. The spectrometer is used to analyze the ozone layer, while other instruments to explore the upper atmosphere and the northern lights. Since 1959, 122. What? Is that why it's called Area 122? Because there's exactly 122 New Zealand scientists working there? There really only been 122 since 1959. Do they maintain 122? Like if someone leaves, someone else comes? Yeah, that's weird. Just not a lot of info on this particular base. What does everybody think about it? We're about to get into even more mind shocking stuff here. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is wild stuff. Heracles states, I believe that Greenland was green during the medieval warming period. Well, I don't know. Just the story that I read is that the Vikings established a lot of settlements in Iceland, and it was a lot more hospitable than Greenland, and they didn't want people coming to Iceland, so they called Iceland Iceland and Greenland Greenland. All right, so let's get crazy. So, a lot of people are aware of this Kobayashi map. Was this world map made 10 centuries ago or whenever? And the real question is it accurate? Are there many other continents outside of the so called ring or ice wall, or several rings or ice walls around Antarctica? I'm going to go through this article here. So, this was published in the Hawaiian Gazette January 11th, 1907. And going through a lot of these old articles, it's quite interesting. You can find tons of articles about giants being discovered, just all these different things before the so called Smithsonian took over and many other institutions took over, politicized, and controlled the flow of information. Was this world map made 10 centuries ago? Stranger almost than the manuscript found in a copper cylinder is the copy of a map which came across seas to Honolulu from a Buddhist temple in the mountains of central Japan. It is a map of the world made 1,000 years ago. Dr. Kobayashi, the well known Japanese physician and surgeon of Honolulu, has received a copy of the map which he believes to have been made by Chinese priests 10 centuries ago. The map is drawn, so it's kind of weird. So he believes it was made by Chinese priests, even though it's from a Japanese Buddhist temple. Curious. The map is drawn on the principle of the Mercator projection, showing the North Pole as the center of a circle, which are continents of North and South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Quote, the map was found by my brother in a Japanese temple in the mountains of Japan, said Dr. Kobayashi. It has been hidden from the Japanese government in modern times, just as it was in ancient times, for in olden days such a map would have been destroyed by the authorities. According to a letter, and the original map was brought from China by a Buddhist priest and concealed in this temple. 10 years ago, my brother was a consumptive. Although I was a physician, he did not wish to be treated with medicines. He decided to go into the mountains and attempt a cure by himself. For 10 years, he has remained there and used his willpower to effect a cure. Today, he is a well man. During his stay there, he found this map. He evolved from it a theory of the flatness of the earth, despite all modern facts showing it to be a sphere. This theory has been one aim in life. He is an artist, and in order to demonstrate his theory, he made beautiful drawings, picturesque and attractive to the eye, in which mechanical, astronomical, and engineering methods are shown. My brother goes back to the days of Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci, who, he says, sailed for a new country, believing that by sailing directly in one direction they would ultimately come to the place. We moderns know that a vessel sailing from a port and going continually in a general easterly manner will arrive at the same place. The vessel, of course, goes around the globe. My brother's theory is that one sails about a vast plain as one would sail around the edges of a bowl. End quote. The illustrations accompanying the map are beautiful examples of Japanese art. No more attractive book of geography has ever been compiled. It is a mass of cherry blossoms, Fujiyama's beautiful blue seas dotted with sails of junks and sampans. There are landscapes and seascapes and bizarre pictures of Japanese women designed along old time styles. But in every sheet of such pictures, the engineering lines are brought out in a way that does not mar the picture. With the text matter explaining each page, the geography should be easily understood. Dr. Kobayashi now has all the original sheets, scores of them, and these he will return to Japan to his brother, who intends to have them put in the hands of publishers. It will be one of the most novel publications of the period, the original map of which a copy drawn by Dr. Kobayashi's brother, and of which the accompanying cut is a tracing, is worm-eaten and barely holds together. The above map, with all the continents and even the Hawaiian Islands shown, was evidently not made by the priests who traced the original lines. So, interesting. So, it's basically admitted that this isn't the original map, of course. It might be a tracing of a tracing and an estimation, but it is curious nonetheless. And it would be curious to see whatever happened, because was this ever published in a book? I couldn't really find much more about this. The other curiosity here is that apparently he's stating that governments would destroy any such maps. Now, that's an interesting statement, because whether this is real or fake, I find it interesting that in 1907, this guy is stating that governments routinely destroyed old maps like this. If there is some kind of widespread conspiracy to cover this up, was there some kind of directive by many different governments where maybe there were tons of these types of maps, but if they were specifically ordered to be destroyed, how many would be left today? Anybody have any thoughts on this specifically? I know you guys are arguing about a lot of different things. Well, not arguing, but presenting ideas about containers. Justin said, trust no maps. Well, of course. But I just think the idea is interesting that if there were more accurate maps, that there were specific directives for governments to destroy them. Because I find that interesting, even in 1907, whether this is real, fake, whatever, I just find that statement interesting. I found that almost as interesting as the map, because he's saying there's a specific directive to destroy these types of maps. Justin said, we have been reset. The truth has been weaponized to deceive. Well, that brings me to another question. If there were resets, multiple resets, was each reset more damaging than the previous? For example, if in the 1800s, was this known, or early 1800s, and at least in certain areas where maybe there weren't directives to destroy these maps? Or the 1700s, or the 1600s, or the 1500s? Was at one point the true nature of the Earth known by most. And each reset kind of took us back further from the truth. Mr. One to One said, I think there's been loads of resets. Yes, maybe. And that's kind of, it seems, so was each reset worse than the one before? Let's get really crazy here because this is MINDSHOCK. Does anybody know that there is or was a secret post office in Antarctica? So let's get crazy here. Let's get really crazy. So this is on QSL.net. A secret U.S. post office operated in Antarctica 1946 to 1948, causing speculation about the real reason behind two concurrent U.S. expeditions. So, enter Finn Ron. Finn Ron was a Norwegian immigrant who later joined the U.S. Navy and was a member and officer in Admiral Byrd's earlier expeditions to Antarctica. In 46 to 48, he led a privately financed expedition to Antarctica, following upon the heels of Operation High Jump. Did anybody know about this? So this is supposedly a private expedition separate from the government's Operation High Jump. Ron's expedition was to the Marguerite Bay, where he reoccupied Byrd's 1939 base. One of the most important results of this expedition was a showing that the Antarctic Peninsula was connected to the rest of Antarctica, thus solving one of the last great public mysteries of the continent. Writing in his book entitled Antarctic Conquest, he stated, quote, although no one knew it, I had been operating a United States post office too, but for reasons of state, had been compelled to keep it secret. What context is he using the word state? Is like state as in government, as in top secret? Secrecy seems to be in no scarcity as it relates to several Antarctic expeditions, perhaps in no small way due to a continued concern that the Nazis had a remnant left in Antarctica from their infamous 1938 to 39 New Schwabenland colonization of Antarctica. Note carefully the swastika in the following photo of the aircraft aboard the Schwabenland, the vessel that took them south. So this photo here, source unknown, the German Air Hansa air cruise on Schwabenland in 38, one of the expeditions, 2 Damier super wall flying boats is on deck behind the group. The first catapult launch of an aircraft in Antarctica was made January 1939. This is curious because people don't really talk about these privately funded expeditions post high jump that are not on the record, so to speak. The web is abundant with sites setting forth info about suspected and actual German involvement in Antarctica, possibly dating back even to the late 1800s. It does make one wonder if there were, in fact, covert, or as they say today, black ops reasons for one or more of the bird expeditions, including Operation High Jump for this discussion, as well as the private expedition of Captain Ron. Many online sources are available with info concerning what I have dubbed the Byrd Conspiracy, which was not a conspiracy by Admiral Byrd, rather what may have been an apparent conspiracy by the government to keep particular info that he had uncovered during High Jump as a secret. I am not passing judgment at this time. I am still investigating the whole thing to my satisfaction. However, lending credence to this conspiracy theory is the observation that Admiral Byrd does in effect seem to disappear, in quotations, from public view shortly after his return from Operation High Jump in 47 until approximately 1955 when he organized Operation Deep Freeze. And he was reported to have been hospitalized in a mental ward shortly after his return in 47. Now, was this a mental ward hospitalization or was it re-education? Was it re-education? This forced hospitalization is said to have come upon the tales of Byrd having made some remarkably candid comments, which included what smacked of being a description of a UFO, to a South American newspaper about what he had found during Operation High Jump. His disappearance from the scene after his arrival back in the States would make it appear he may have been promptly squelched. Now, this is an old article here from QSL.net, so I believe this was way before the so-called Flat Earth resurgence, so he might just be going with speculation that this all has to do with UFOs. And of course, let's not fall for false dichotomies, flat or globe. There could still be UFO aircraft, either from interdimensional entities or from the lands beyond the ice wall. Remember that this time period coincided roughly with the Roswell UFO sightings. Yeah, that is interesting. Is that also a coincidence? So High Jump is 47 around Roswell. That is curious. So High Jump would have been first, early in 47, then Roswell to follow in the summer of 47. Okay, here we go. Here on MINDSHOCK, we are unleashing a brand new Roswell conspiracy theory. I've never heard this anywhere before. Is it possible that Byrd's expedition, so if there are entities, either interdimensional or from beyond the ice wall on different continents, they see Admiral Byrd poking around Antarctica, and they send their own scouting mission of UFOs to kind of see where Admiral Byrd came from. And that's the crash in Roswell. If you haven't checked out the Roswell podcast on MINDSHOCK, check that out, the most comprehensive podcast on the case. But I just unleashed this brand new theory here and now on this episode. User Illusions commented, MK Ultra re-education, and they wanted the people to believe Byrd lost his mind and didn't know what he was saying. Well, the other weird thing is the whole UFO war that supposedly took place in Antarctica. I'm going to do a separate episode on that. I don't want to get sidetracked here with UFOs because we have so much more to go over here, but that was curious that supposedly there was this massive air battle in Antarctica. But some people think that the Germans might have had some kind of an alliance with interdimensional or other entities from beyond the ice wall. But who knows? This was a situation that was the last thing the government would have wanted another military official, in this case a quite prominent and popular man, who had spent years crisscrossing the U.S. giving lectures and whose word would have been quite respected and accepted, who apparently reported having seen and or believing in UFOs. Note, if Operation High Jump had continued to its full expected duration of 6 to 8 months, they would have still been in Antarctica at the time of Roswell. The expedition headed back to the US in early 47, well short of its expected ending. Some would say limped back after suffering great losses of personnel and equipment. The official record only sets forth a limited loss of life and aircraft, but conspiracists feel the record has been doctored or we are not being told the full story. So if there was some kind of war with UFOs in Antarctica, was the Roswell craft simply some kind of reconnaissance mission to see, if there was going to be another war, if there were going to be more? Was it just a scouting mission? Even if the UFOs squashed the U.S. forces, they might have still been running reconnaissance missions to see if there would be another attempt of some kind in Antarctica, if that is what happened. Obviously, I do not claim anything is true or untrue. The motto here, of course, is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Contrast this lack of public accessibility after Operation High Jump to the previous well-known availability of Admiral Byrd in the period following his first 2 Antarctic expeditions, where there are documented philatelic items from cities all over the country serving as commemorations of where Byrd visited, lecturing to the public about his travels in Antarctica. That Byrd loved to travel and lecture about his polar expeditions is quite evident. The polar regions in his expeditions were his very reason for existence. He had said from the time he was a child that he felt destined to be a polar explorer. He had a passion for all things polar, especially exploration that could scarcely be contained. Operation High Jump was at least as important in many respects as it would appear as his previous expeditions. So where was he after his return? Where did he go? Was he locked away so he couldn't share the story of what he had really found in Antarctica? As some theorists suggest, during Operation High Jump, did he encounter and engage Nazi forces operating from bases that lodged advanced aircraft with advanced propulsion systems? Many think so, and I am beginning to see some curiosities about many aspects of Operation High Jump, and now perhaps even with Ron's expedition. The little tidbit mentioned above that Ron forked us in his book only begins to tell us why the Oleona base Antarctic postmark is one of the rarest polar cancels that exist. With this being the first American post office established on the Antarctic continent, it is a shame that the cancel was not used more often. Is there perhaps a larger reason why this post office was kept secret? We do know that many countries, including Britain, had concurrent secret bases and or expeditions in the same general time period, notably Port Lockroy on the Antarctic Peninsula. Port Lockroy was a part of a top secret World War II British expedition called Operation Tabarin. Operation Tabarin was the beginning of Britain's permanent presence on the Antarctic continent and was built to serve as a southern outpost and to keep an eye on suspected Nazi presence on the ice. In a 2001 BBC interview, one of the last remaining survivors of that secret expedition, Guyon Davies, noted that the posting of mail from their secret base was a way of their laying claim to or establishing that section of Antarctica as British sovereign territory. In other words, just as the Nazis were known to have dropped metal dart markers with the Third Reich swastika emblem over a large area of Antarctica during their expedition in 39 to act as a laying of a claim, for any country such as Britain to have a post office that actually accepted and postmarked mail definitely shows an intention on their part of not only establishing a base, but of staying. So, what does this all mean? Because if we're talking about the establishment of permanent post offices, does that mean one, Antarctica is not quite as uninhabitable as people are led to believe? I mean, even in this photo, I mean, they're dressed. It doesn't look like it's a hot summer, but there's no parkas here. I mean, obviously Antarctica's big regardless of which map you're going by. So there would be huge variations in temperatures, but look at the way these guys are dressed. This does not look uninhabitable. They don't even have gloves on. Their ears aren't even covered. Their necks aren't covered. And this is an Antarctic mission? Furthermore, I mean, if we go into even deeper conspiracies, is HARP being used to modify the weather and make it so cold down there as to prevent exploration artificially? But the post office idea is strange because are they really looking to establish permanent residency? Like, what was the mindset at that time? That they're going to set up permanent Antarctic settlements and cities? Is that what some of these governments were thinking? While the U.S. did not then and does not now recognize any country as having specific territorial claims upon Antarctica, for Ron to have allowed his expedition members to have open mailing of letters from Oleona Base would have served a similar purpose as with Port Lockroy, but for some reason he would not allow that to be done. Why? Some mail did escape, and other mail from members of the Ron expedition is known to have been posted from nearby British bases. The posting of mail often serves as geopolitical purpose in addition to the simple fact it carries mail back home to loved ones and is a great curiosity to many polar philatelists and followers of Antarctic history that it was not done in this instance. The full story about the existence of the post office, as well as even greater secrets, may have passed with Captain Ron. The Oleona Bay covers are mostly commonly seen with the date of March 12th, 1947, which was the date the expedition arrived at Marguerite Bay, Antarctica. In this instance, the cover illustrated above is extraordinary in that it is printed on an envelope from the Bird 2 Antarctic expedition, postmarked with the less common hand cancellation from that mission, then postmarked at Oleona Basin 47 with the addition of Captain Ron's corner card and the IGY Ellsworth Station octagonal cachet, and the best part of all, Ron's signature, in which he adds the word postmaster, rounding it out to make a splendid cover. A cover like this would fare extremely well in a polar auction. I would go so far as to term it the holy grail of a polar collection. Only very few covers I can think of would be more collectible, in my opinion. So, what does everyone make of this? Mr. One to One states, try and leave your country without stating your destination. They won't let us out. That's an interesting point. You can't freely explore anywhere. So let's get crazier. If this establishment of post offices by many countries, is it possible? Let's go to the next map here. I'm sure some of you have seen these maps. If these maps are even remotely accurate, if there are other lands and there possibly are treaties, would this necessitate a post office in Antarctica to facilitate further mail and correspondence with countries and continents that are not so called officially known? Because if this is all covered up, if there are other lands and countries, can people in the know, like, is Antarctica kind of like some kind of midway point where there could be travelers from distant lands beyond the ice wall traveling within our ice circle of our known continents, and they can go back and forth? And how would anybody know? Obviously, this is all speculation, but I find it curious that there were established post offices in Antarctica. Yes, Riz, there's many unknowns. Many, many unknowns. We're going to get real crazy here. We're going to get even crazier. Let's up the ante even further. So, actually, you know what? Would now be a good time? I think now would be a good time to go over the old story about the man from Taured. Does everybody remember this? John Allen Kuchar Zegras is the reported name of a man detained in 1960 in Japan for alleged document fabrication. He was dubbed as the Mystery Man by Japanese news at the time and became a prototype for some urban legends. In October 59, and this is straight from the wiki, a man recorded as John Allen Kuchar Zegras, 36, entered Japan with his Korean wife. 3 months later, he was arrested by the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, suspected of identity fraud. He tried to cash a 200,000 yen check and a $140, around 50,400 yen at the time, traveler's check at the Japanese office of Chase Manhattan Bank and 100,000 yen at the Japanese office of the Bank of Korea. The case was investigated by Atsuyuki Sasa of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department Public Security Bureau, who would later write about Zegras in his memoirs. Although his passport contained the stamps of Japanese embassies in different East Asian countries, the passport was determined to be counterfeit. Moreover, a visa was issued by the Japanese embassy in Taipei. According to the records, Zegras said he was born in the U.S., moved to the UK through Czechoslovakia and Germany, and attended high school there. During World War II, he was a pilot of the Royal Air Force and was once captured by the Germans. After the war, he lived in Latin America. Later, he became a spy for the Americans in South Korea, served as a pilot in Thailand and Vietnam, and after that, he was assigned by the United Arab Republic. He arrived to Japan for a secret mission, which included recruiting Japanese military volunteers for the United Arab Republic. Afterward, eventually, after contacting the mentioned countries, it was ruled that the info was not based on any facts and that the seals in his pseudo-passport were proven to be fabricated. On August 10th, 1960, Tokyo District Court reviewed the case and sentenced Zegras to 1 year in prison. After the announcement, he tried to commit suicide by cutting his veins with a piece of glass secretly brought by him to the court. After his release, Zegras was deported from Japan to Hong Kong, where he was recorded to enter the region. His wife was deported to South Korea. And I don't know, nobody ever tracked them after that. That's what's curious. So the first thing that jumps out to me. Is this what disavowalment looks like? Now, maybe I've just seen too many Mission Impossible movies. Maybe I've just seen too many. But if he was a legit secret agent and he got compromised, what would disavowalment look like? Would they claim his documents were forged even if they weren't? Or were the documents actually forged or marked by his handlers so that in the case of disavowalment, and they looked pretty good, in the case of disavowalment, they would find them forged, but only in the case of disavowalment where maybe they would instruct the authorities on how to figure out if they were forged or not, or they weren't forged and they were legit, and certain powers that be disavowed him, and then this is what the response looked like. A lot of coincidence theorists, they don't even have the mental capacity to comprehend such a theory. But if he really was some kind of top secret operative, is this what disavowalment would look like? They make everybody look like he's this crazy forger so no one would believe him about any of these supposedly outlandish on the surface stories. So that's the first thing that jumps out at me is this what disavowalment looks like? Because it just, that's what it seems like. And then we never hear from these people ever again. Like, what happened to him and his wife? If that was even really his wife, or was that his fellow agent posing as his wife? And then these people just disappear off the surface of the earth. So before we get into the different theories on what this is, I'm going to go over the urban legends that arose from this actual story. On August 15th, 1960 issue of The Province, the story was reported with some alterations. The newspaper said in an article titled Man with His Own Country, claimed that John Allen Kuchar Zegras claimed to be a naturalized Ethiopian and an intelligent agent for Colonel Nasser. Nasser was an Egyptian military officer and politician who served as the second president of Egypt from 54 until his death in 1970. Nasser led the Egyptian Revolution of 52 and introduced far-reaching land reforms the following year. So this guy carried a passport supposedly issued at Tamanrasset, the capital of Taured, south of the Sahara. Taured is likely Taureg misspelled, and Tamanrasset is an actual province in Algeria. A text in Taured language written with Latin characters was also cited by the newspaper. Earlier, July 29, 1960, the story in this form was mentioned in the British House of Commons when it was cited by Robert Matthew as an argument that passports are not very good security checks. So what's curious is all of the coincidence theorists, when this story first hit, they were saying it's all fabricated and it's all made up, like a modern urban legend that was completely fabricated. And as usual, the coincidence theorists are wrong because there's clear legitimate evidence here that this story was indeed published in legitimate newspapers, and there's enough legitimate basis that it was even cited in the British House of Commons, all on record. The case was mentioned since 1964 in books by Jacques Bergier. According to his version of the story, a person from Taured, a country in eastern Africa which stretched from Mauritania to Sudan and included a large part of Algeria, was arrested in 1954 in Japan during a passport check and shut up in a psychiatric hospital, where it was revealed that he came to buy arms for the True Arab Legion. So does this sound like another re-education incident? Some kind of disavowalment and re-education? The country in this story alludes to the United Arab Republic, which was in fact included modern Syria and Egypt. In 81, the story was mentioned in a book, The Directory of Possibilities by Colin Wilson and John Grant, with Taureg misspelled again as Taured. So there's two misspellings here. The A and the U are switched, as well as the G for the D. So was it really misspelled? I'll get into that in a second. Finally, a story featured on various Japanese websites dedicated to urban legends and occult stories say that a man from another dimension arrived at the Haneda airport in 54. He possessed a passport from the fictional country Taured, and when asked about his own nation in particular, he pointed at Andorra, but was confused as he has never heard about it. He was placed in a hotel with two guards for investigation, but disappeared from there the following morning, the truth remaining unknown. So, Andorra is actually between Spain and France. So, it is not in Africa, which is weird. So, we'll get into a few of the different theories. So, was this guy MK Ultra to the point where is that what caused this confusion? Was this an MK Ultra spy that was re-educated and then his true fate is unknown? Yeah, you guys in the chat, we need to stay on topic here. This is possibly the most mind-shocking conspiracy of all time. And you guys are talking about tickling. Okay, so the man from Taured, couple different theories here. Is he an interdimensional traveler? Or was he a legit spy that was MK Ultra and that's why he was confused? Just some brain issues, early stages of MK Ultra before they refined the MK Ultra system. If they ever did. I mean, MK Ultra might still have glitches now, with celebrities or politicians glitching out from time to time. I mean, who knows? Now, here's why I went over this story. Because is it possible that he's actually coming from beyond the ice wall? Because if he's some kind of top secret operative, maybe he's MK Ultra, maybe he's not, but he's coming from lands beyond the ice wall, and he's traveling within our realm and countries, and there was some kind of passport mix-up. And has this happened way more frequently than we know, and this was only one of many cases that got documented? But it just got me thinking, if there are these post offices in Antarctica, what if people are traveling back and forth between these lands from beyond the ice wall? What if he got confused on the map because our maps only include the inner ring and not the lands beyond? And if lands beyond are very similar, I mean, some of them could be similar, who knows? Is that why he got confused? And furthermore, if there are, like, let's say Japan or the US, let's say the US, the same way that US has territories, perhaps it has territories beyond the ice wall. Perhaps many countries do. How would we ever know? In some of the retellings, it states that he insisted that Taured existed for nearly 1,000 years. Now, some people think this was just a parallel universe where there's slight irregularities, where there are similarities and there are similar named countries, but not exact. What's weird is if he was a scam artist, would he really make up this sensational story that's obviously fake? I mean, that's the thing. Would he really be claiming all of this if it was so obviously fake? So, I found more information from allthatisinteresting.com. He actually did claim that he was from the CIA and the FBI working in Japan on orders from an Arab related organization. If you're going to make up a story, are you going to say something like that? That you're from both the CIA and the FBI, you're working in Japan on orders from an Arab related organization. The other thing is, it states here that his passport was supposedly the size of a weekly magazine and was recognizable at a glance as fake. So supposedly it was completely obviously fake. Like he was trying to pass off a large magazine as a small standard passport. I don't know if that's true or not. All that's interesting is reporting that. So, would someone just insist that that's true? Now, if he's from a parallel universe where they use much larger passports that look like magazines, or if beyond the ice wall they have different passport systems and he simply escaped and didn't know that, what does that mean? Also, it states that after he supposedly left Japan, John Allen Zegers, he's never mentioned anywhere ever again. So if he was a real agent that was disavowed or whatever, was he taken out? Because there's literally no mention of him ever again. So this is a documented human being in official Japanese law enforcement and court documentation who's supposedly deported, never heard from ever again. What happened to this guy? Regardless if he was a scam artist, a real agent, interdimensional slip, or from beyond the ice wall, what happened to him after? Not a trace of this guy. I mean, if the British Commons is mentioning him, you would think they would have kept tabs on him. So, in other write ups, supposedly he actually did have currency from various different European countries. I don't know how easy that would be to get in Japan, but I don't know. It is kind of weird. So, but other sources are saying that the passport had legitimate looking stamps. So I don't know if there's just an inaccuracy and maybe the passport itself looked fake, but the stamps looked real, which is why there was so much confusion. I don't know. I mean, they even have the record of the judge who sentenced him. It was Judge Yamagishi, and he was sentenced to 1 year imprisonment. Also, apparently, there was a language that couldn't be identified in the passport. So, did he just make up his own language? Why would he think anyone would believe that? I mean, I don't know. That's kind of weird. Hmm. It's just funny because a lot of coincidence theorists they insist that the whole thing was faked when it's obviously, I mean, this is on record something that happened with court documents and official investigation. So obviously the details are a little unclear, but obviously there was the charge, I believe, was forging documents and so forged passport and some other kind of fraud involving the currency, even though the currency was real. He was he supposedly stole money in traveler's checks, but I don't know how he would have done that. But the official charge, I believe, was forging documents. And illegal entry into Japan and trying to pass phony checks. So this is in Tokyo, Kyoto, December 22nd, 1961. So he was sentenced 1 year illegally entering Japan in relation to the forged documents and apparently passing phony checks. Now, would be curious, he's trying to pass phony checks. If he's from another dimension or from countries beyond the ice wall, are those checks actually legit? Because apparently there were some kind of characters on all his documents that were not identified. So he either made up a new language or they're unidentified. And if this guy, and he had real denominations of currency from various European countries. So it just seems strange because if he didn't have that, we might possibly be able to just write him off as a crazy guy. But how did he have legit currency from various European countries? So apparently he was not charged with espionage because either they thought he was lying or he was officially disavowed. Who knows? Yeah, Riz, it's really tough to know. Obviously, we have no way of knowing what was really said between all these parties. But this, just examining Antarctica, the post offices, it's it just made me think of this story that I've wanted to cover forever, just because it's so interesting. Because if he was just some like, why would he think he could pass that off as? It's kind of obvious it's not real. Now, if people are saying, okay, well, maybe he has mental health issues, because apparently I mean, there's different versions of the story. It's unclear whether he was in prison the whole time or he was in a psychiatric facility. But let's move on to the next point, which is one of the biggest curiosities in all of history, of course, and that is Atlantis. So, does anybody think it's interesting? Riz, there's no mention of family or anything else. Does anybody find it interesting that Atlantis is described as having many rings? So, I don't know if anybody's covered this theory, but is Atlantis not just our inner circle? Because there have been theories, of course, that Atlantis is some kind of worldwide civilization, or it was before the reset. So it was it was whatever Lemuria, Atlantis, Tartaria. Those are all the different resets, and they were all worldwide civilizations on all our known continents. But is it possible Atlantis is actually the entire realm of existence, including all of these concentric circles, alternating land masses and water as described? Riz, I haven't seen Witsit's coverage of Atlantis. Did he talk about this theory? Because I'm going to go over thoughtco.com, Atlantis as it was told in Plato's Socratic Dialogues by N.S. Gill. The original story of the lost island of Atlantis comes to us from two Socratic dialogues called the Timaeus and the Critias, both written about 360 BC by the Greek philosopher Plato. Together, the dialogues are a festival speech prepared by Plato to be told on the day of Panathenaea in honor of the goddess Athena. They describe a meeting of men who had met the previous day to hear Socrates describe the ideal state. A Socratic dialogue. According to the dialogue, Socrates asked three men to meet him on this day: Timaeus of Locri, Hermocrates of Syracuse, interesting name there, and Critias of Athens. Syracuse. I'm not going to get into all the geography. The Syracuse in New York, Athens in Georgia. I mean, all these names are reused so many times. I mean, it's wild. Socrates asked the men to tell him stories about how ancient Athens interacted with other states. The first to report was Critias, who told how his grandfather had met with the Athenian poet and lawgiver Solon, one of the seven sages. Solon had been to Egypt, where priests had compared Egypt and Athens and talked about the gods and legends of both lands. One such Egyptian story was about Atlantis. The Atlantis tale is part of a Socratic dialogue, not a historical treatise. The story is preceded by an account of Helios, the sun god's son Phaethon, yoking horses to his father's chariot and then driving them through the sky and scorching the earth. Rather than the exact reporting of past events, the Atlantis story describes an impossible set of circumstances which were designed by Plato to represent how a miniature utopia failed and became a lesson to us defining the proper behavior of a state. So we have a lot of parallels here. And we have, I mean, wow. There's just, there's so many issues here and overlaps. Because is this also, was Atlantis the Garden of Eden? I mean, there's big questions here. Because if there was some kind of utopia and there's all these overlapping stories and myths about how everything fell apart, or a reset, so to speak, possibly use an artificial reset. Like, for example, if the Sahara was jungle before the previous reset, what are these stories about these chariots and the sun? Or, as in the occult, supposedly the motion of the sun is different in different ages, and its motion changes, which is why different continents have different climates in different ages. For example, Antarctica could have been tropical, and now it's Arctic, and it's going to go back and forth infinite times for infinite resets. Yes, Riz, there's a lot of info about Atlantis. I just find a lot of this very curious regarding the overlaps of a lot of these stories, because it seems like every ancient civilization has some kind of Atlantis or Great Flood myth overlap or reset, if you will. And just all of the names, like even the Atlantic Ocean, Atlantic, Atlantis. I never could get over that because to me, that's a bridge too far. Atlantis, Atlantic Ocean. Then you also have the Antilles Islands, Then you also have Lake Atitlan. So this is Mayan ruins, and Lake Atitlan is also very, very curious. I mean, that's an interesting name, isn't it? It's in Guatemala's southwestern highlands. Mayan villages. Lake Atitlan. I don't know. I don't know. Just the reusing of the name makes me think that this Atlantis was a worldwide civilization. So let's go back to Solon's story here. And Atitlan means place of water in the native Nahuatl language. Furthermore, in the Aztec, Aztlan is mentioned with the Aztecs as well. Aztlan is the ancestral homeland of the Aztec people. Azteca is the Nahuatl word for people from Atlant. Aztlan is mentioned in several ethnohistorical sources dating from the colonial period, and while they each cite varying lists of the different tribal groups who participated in the migration from Aztlan to central Mexico, the Mexica who went on to found the Mexico Tenochtitlan are mentioned in all of the accounts. So we have all these different peoples. So we have the Aztec, the Maya, on the other side of the ocean, talking about Aztlan, and then you have the Egyptians talking about Atlantis, and then you have the Atlantic Ocean in between Aztlan and Atlantis being talked about. So you have Aztlan being talked about in Central America, and then you have Atlantis being talked about in Africa and the Mediterranean. And then you have the Atlantic Ocean in between them. Does anybody find this weird? Anybody find that too coincidental? Just a little tiny bit? Just a touch, maybe? And then, of course, you have the pyramids of Central and South America. And then you have the pyramids. There's actually pyramids in Greece as well, for people who don't know. I mean, there's pyramids everywhere in China, etc. So you have all of these similar coincidences. And then it's called the Atlantic Ocean. That one, I mean, I just can't get around that one. So, going back to Solon's story here, the tale, according to the Egyptians, or rather what Plato described Critias reporting what his grandfather was told by Solon, Well, and by the way, you also have the Atlantean mystery schools of ancient Egypt, supposedly Egypt born out of the previous civilization of Atlantis. Once upon a time, there was a mighty power based on an island in the Atlantic Ocean. The empire was called Atlantis, and it ruled over several other islands and parts of the continents of Africa and Europe. So now that we've done all of this research, everything from Fomenko's new chronology to mud floods and resets, does this make more sense? Does Plato's story here, Plato and Solon, this passed down story, does it make more sense in a post mud flood reset realization context? Because I've been looking at this stuff for a long time. It makes a lot more sense once you start factoring in mud floods and resets. Atlantis was arranged in concentric rings of alternating water and land. So here's what I want to bring up. Does this alternating concentric circles of water and land, does anybody think it looks like this ice wall map or even this world map from again the Kobayashi map? Does it not look like alternating concentric circles of water and land? Now, either knowingly or not knowingly, like who knows what the Atlantean mystery schools of Egypt knew, who knows what Solon knew or any of the Greeks. So maybe they understood this as it was and it was mistranslated, or maybe they were operating with limited information and they thought it meant smaller circles than it did. But on a grand scale, if there are ice walls or multiple ice walls, doesn't this description of Atlantis actually kind of match the original story from Solon? I'll repeat it again. Atlantis was arranged in concentric rings of alternating water and land. I mean, that's a major mind shock for me because in all of these I mean, this is broken telephone times five, right? I mean, who knows what the translation between the Egyptian and the Greek even was? But is it possible they were talking on a much grander scale? It kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense. The soil was rich, said Critias, the engineers technically accomplished, the architecture extravagant, with baths, harbor installations, and barracks. The central plain outside the city had canals and a magnificent irrigation system. Atlantis had kings and a civil administration, as well as an organized military. Their rituals matched Athens for bull baiting, sacrifice, and prayer. But then it waged an unprovoked imperialistic war on the remainder of Asia and Europe. When Atlantis attacked, Athens showed its excellence as the leader of the Greeks, the much smaller city state, the only power to stand against Atlantis. Alone, Athens triumphed over the invading Atlantean forces, defeating the enemy, preventing the free from being enslaved, and freeing those who had been enslaved. So let's look at that statement again, because I think a lot of people are not understanding the possible interpretation here. Because if Atlantis was a worldwide civilization and its agents enslaved everyone, similarly, I mean, wage slaves, tax slaves, whatever you want to call them, Is there a much deeper meaning here? And if all of these states, so to speak, Asia, Europe, whatever, if at that time it was known that the world was much bigger and there were all of these other territories of, let's say, Europe and Asia, I mean, who knows? Maybe the Greeks even had territories beyond the ice wall as well. And there were these resets and battles that might have reached Athens, or again, which Athens? Because if there are multiple Athens and Syracuses and all of these cities that are reused within our known continents, how do we know that there aren't many other Athens beyond the ice wall? Many other Jerusalems and Londons and Yorks. How do we know that? Because if some of the history is describing what is occurring on lands beyond the ice wall with the same names as lands within, would that confuse history enough to where we could never figure it out? Nick Finger, the case for the central palace of Atlantis being in Tampa, Florida, as presented by Old World Florida, is fairly compelling. I've seen some of their videos, but who said it's the central palace? Why would there not be many different palaces in many different areas, possibly beyond the ice wall as well? I mean, there's definitely some weird stuff, and I mean, there's weird stuff everywhere. I mean, you could make a case, yeah, but let's not fall for false dichotomies. There very well might have been a palace of Atlantis in Florida and in many other places. After the battle, there were violent earthquakes and floods, and Atlantis sank into the sea, and all the Athenian warriors were swallowed up by the earth. So, what does that mean? There were no survivors of Athens to tell this story? Does anybody find this weird? That a Greek has to go to Egypt to hear the story about how the Athenians triumphed over the Atlanteans because there were no Athenians left from that battle? There's clearly some mistranslation going on here. Clearly, because this doesn't make any sense. And if these are two power structures, is it possible that the whatever's being referred to as Athens or the Athenians, they're the previous civilization? They just happen to be located in Athens. And we don't even know which Athens. Heracles, Athens, Georgia. I mean, there's many different Athens. So we don't even know if this story is describing what is within our ice wall, within the central circle, or within lands with similar names beyond the ice wall. And if there are multiple ice walls, this description of Atlantis seems to match this map from Kobayashi in Japan. So what does that mean? I don't know I don't know if I can write this off as all coincidence. And then he's also talking about violent earthquakes and floods after the battle. This doesn't seem like a low-tech battle. Why would there randomly be earthquakes and floods just changing the entire landscape of the world if it's just a regular low-tech swords and shield battle in Athens? So if there's some kind of cosmic level technology, like laser techs or bombs, like in a lot of in ancient India, they have a lot of those stories. In the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, they talk about a lot of major destructions, advanced tech, vimanas, flying vehicles, etc. So it almost seems like this story of Atlantis could possibly involve a scale that we can't even imagine, and advanced technology we might not even be able to imagine. Nick, some evidence for Florida Atlantis. Well, again, if Atlantis was a worldwide civilization, it may have had a major city in Florida. Very possible. A lot of that would match. That doesn't mean it wasn't also elsewhere. North Star General, medieval pronounced mid oval, Midgard, Middle Earth. Wow. You just shocked my mind, North Star General. Are you new here? Wow, those are the comments we're looking for. That I have not seen that before. Mid oval. And if we're talking about multiple rings, multiple ovals, Midgard would be the Middle Earth. So are we even can we even know what if we're not even the smallest circle in the middle? Because the North Pole, obviously, the Arctic is also pretty heavily controlled. Is it possible there's another ring in there? Or multiple rings? I mean, I don't think the scale works to where they could be that big just based on. I mean, we can't really verify the distance between continents exactly, but it seems like in the so-called northern hemisphere things kind of work. It only gets a little funky in the southern hemisphere regardless of what map you got, but it seems like stuff in the northern hemisphere kind of works in terms of distances between continents. Rune could be possible, but very much less likely. Well, what about, well, it's not less likely if we're talking much smaller scale. Like if there are very tiny islands, like Hyperborea or whatever, there's all these islands that were supposedly sighted, mythical islands sighted from the UK or from Norway. If they're tiny little islands, there could be more concentrical ice rings at the North Pole. They're just much, much smaller. Nick said, agreed it was worldwide. To my knowledge, the intercoastal waterway that goes all the way around Florida is the largest man made earthwork, and no one knows who made it. Yeah, I need to look into that more. I'll be doing more follow up episodes, of course. Heracles, yes, the Straits of Gibraltar. But here's the thing, though. If it's worldwide, would Atlantis be the capital as well as the name of the entire civilization? Because if the capital was in the Atlantic Ocean, that kind of makes sense. But again, what kind of scale are we working with? Because if there's way more rings and there's another Gibraltar or whatever, I think the pillars, whatever he referenced the pillars as, there could be many other pillars on a much larger scale. And I've never really seen anybody try to tackle the issue of scale. But with these older maps, it seems like these concentric circles could be describing something much, much larger. Sphinx Bear, isn't Atlantis the capital according to Greek mythology? Again, it's tough. I mean, the story's kind of weird because apparently the Atlantean forces are clashing with the Athenian forces, but none of the Athenian forces survived. So he got this story from Egypt. Wow, Mr. One to One, that's interesting. Giants could be on the outer rings and little people in the smaller rings. Justin stated, allegedly Japan discovered hundreds of new islands recently. Yeah, that was weird. That was super weird. Like, if they're not that far from the coast, how would they not know they were there? unless there's drastically changed sea levels, but I don't believe that is being claimed. So, any final thoughts here? I'm going to be wrapping this up. I just wanted to introduce this theory that if these concentric rings are just ice walls, is Atlantis referring to the entire realm? And does that explain quite a bit? North Star General blew my mind with medieval, mid oval, Middle Earth. That's crazy. So, do these periods, like the medieval period, mid oval period, is this referring to both time and space? Like different realms kind of have their rule? Like, let's say the US is this major superpower in modern times. Does that also apply overlapping to the outer rings? Like, there are different superpowers in different sets of rings at different times? Yeah, Nick, I'm gonna have to check out Old World Florida some more. I haven't checked them out in a little bit, but yeah, they got some interesting stuff on there, no doubt. So that'll be it for now, but I do want to just bring attention to what this all would mean. No problem, Justin. Heracles said, I have a theory that if what Bruce is saying is true, then when it was warmer, it was well known that there is more land. Yeah, that's an excellent point as well. Because if there are naturally occurring cycles, like, I mean, there's even old legends on where the sun disappeared for a year or whatever, or there are two suns. So if these celestial bodies are changing, then the land masses and the outer rings to inner rings could change as well. But that makes perfect sense because if, let's say, Antarctica had no ice, it would be much easier to travel there and across the entire, you'd be able to cross that ring pretty easily and possibly to the next ring and the next ring. But thanks again for joining us, all the Mind Shock listeners out there. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notification. You could also just go to youtube.com/mindshock. You could also check out the Bruce McGuire channel. I post stuff on there that I don't post on here. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind. Leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.